Before the physics competition, Ethan and his crush Carter planned to go street racing together to blow off some steam. When Nina found out, she immediately informed his parents to stop him. The next day, the news spread all over the internet. High school students engaged in illegal late-night racing. The report was grim. 2 dead, 1 seriously injured. Carter was one of the casualties. Ethan didn't blame Nina. In fact, years later he even got down on one knee and proposed to her. But on the day of their wedding, the brakes on the wedding car failed. As Nina lay in a pool of blood, she reached out to him, but he only smiled and asked, "So, do you finally know what it feels like to be trapped at the scene of a car crash, waiting to die?" Terror filled her eyes, but then she heard his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Does it hurt?" Carter was only 18. "You lived 10 years longer than she did." Nina died in despair and became nothing more than a wandering soul. After that, she watched Ethan cry and put on a show of grief and deep affection. She saw her parents mentally collapse over her death. Ethan used the opportunity to gain their trust, gradually taking control of her family's business. He manipulated them while they were mourning, stripping her company of all its assets. In the end, he even drove her parents to commit suicide. After everything was done, he sat in front of Carter's grave, holding a bottle of liquor and murmured, "I've avenged you." Nina laughed and then she cried. So, all the years they spent growing up together meant nothing compared to a girl who had only been in his life for 1 year? If she had another chance, Nina would never interfere in his life again. When Nina opened her eyes, she had returned to that night in Riverdale, the night Ethan was about to go street racing in the mountains for Carter. She was holding onto his arm, trying to stop him. "Whether I go or not has nothing to do with you. Stop meddling in my business," Ethan said impatiently. Nina saw the irritation in his eyes and felt a moment of panic. In her past life, she only knew that racing on an unfamiliar mountain road was dangerous, which was why she kept trying to stop him. She even told his parents, making such a big scene that they had to intervene. Only after his father and mother threatened him did he give up on racing that night. The next day, the news reported that a group of students had died in a racing accident on that very mountain. Back then, she had believed that she had stopped Ethan, but she never expected that her actions that night would push her into the abyss. Thinking of this, Nina let go of his arm. "Fine. From now on, I won't interfere with you anymore." Ethan clearly hadn't expected Nina to say that. He looked momentarily stunned, but then he quickly got on his secretly purchased motorcycle and sped away. Nina watched his retreating figure and turned away without a second thought. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a local news alert. High school students involved in late-night street racing. 10 dead, 2 injured. Unfortunately, Ethan and Carter weren't among the dead. They were the 2 who had survived with injuries. This time, Nina didn't stop Ethan, but fate had taken an unexpected turn. He had ended up dragging Carter down with him. Our families had always been close, so Nina's parents took her to the hospital early in the morning to visit him. Ethan had broken an arm and a leg. Now he lay in bed, his limbs encased in plaster. His mother sobbed, her eyes swollen like walnuts. She kept looking at him, wanting to say something, but ultimately swallowed her words, afraid of upsetting him. She held Nina's hand and pleaded, "Nina, you know Ethan listens to you the most. Please talk to him, help him through this." Did he really listen to me the most? In her past life, Ethan had agreed to Nina's requests, but only because she threw tantrums and pestered him relentlessly. Maybe that was why he had grown tired of her. After all, who would like someone who did nothing but nag and control them? Nina agreed to his mother's request and walked up to Ethan. Looking at his injured body, she thought she'd see him in despair, but instead, he looked elated, as if something wonderful had happened. He smiled at her and said, "Yesterday Carter agreed to be my girlfriend." It felt like he had said it just for Nina's benefit, to make sure she knew not to bother him anymore. Of course, Nina had no intention of humiliating herself again. She deliberately changed the subject. "Oh, then I guess you won't be able to compete in the physics competition." His good mood instantly vanished. Ethan wasn't particularly outstanding in his studies except for physics. His talent in the subject had won him a spot in the national physics competition. Everyone had been counting on him to achieve a good ranking. In Nina's past life, he had lived up to expectations, securing first place. His victory had earned him a special admissions offer from a prestigious university. But this time he wouldn't even be able to compete. The moment Nina learned about his injury, she called their teacher and volunteered to take his place. After a brief pause, the teacher agreed. After all, Nina's physics grades were no worse than Ethan's. More importantly, in her past life, she was a university physics professor. A competition like this was nothing difficult for her. Ethan's expression darkened slightly, but in the next second, he forced a smile. "It's fine. I can still take the college entrance exams with Carter." Nina simply smiled and said nothing. Just then, a commotion broke out outside the hospital room. Last night, Ethan had done everything he could to protect Carter, so she wasn't seriously injured. The moment she woke up, she wanted to see him, but she hadn't expected to run into Mrs. Miller, Ethan's mother, outside the room. Mrs. Miller knew that Ethan had gotten hurt because of Carter, so naturally, she wasn't pleased to see her. Without hesitation, she slapped Carter across the face. "You little vixen. If it weren't for you, my son wouldn't be in this condition. Senior year is about to start. How is he supposed to focus on his studies like this?" Carter sobbed pitifully. I'll take responsibility for Ethan. Please don't hit me, Auntie." A hospital room door stood between them, but Carter's soft, trembling voice carried through, making her sound helpless and fragile, perfectly fitting the image of an innocent, delicate girl. Ethan immediately panicked. He tried to get out of bed, but with his injuries he lost his balance and crashed to the floor with a loud thud. Nina stood there watching him struggle on the ground, feeling a wave of satisfaction rise in her chest. He lifted his head, looking at her with desperation, silently begging for her help. He didn't want to embarrass himself in front of the girl he loved the most. Nina turned away and walked toward the door. Then in a loud voice she said, "Mrs. Miller, Ethan heard you hitting someone and got so agitated that he fell out of bed." A crowd had already gathered outside, eager to watch the drama unfold. As soon as Nina opened the door, everyone turned their attention to the room. There on the floor was Ethan, sprawled out, unable to get up. The looks in their eyes varied. Some mocking, some pitying. The Millers were nouveau riche, and Mrs. Miller had put in a lot of effort to groom Ethan into someone worthy of high society. She had raised him with strict etiquette, ensuring that he always presented himself well. But now he had thrown all that away for a woman, making a complete fool of himself. At that moment, Mrs. Miller's resentment toward Carter reached its peak. Another argument erupted in the hospital room, but Nina simply turned away, the satisfaction in her heart growing. When Nina returned to school, Carter was already back as well. For some reason, a rumor had started spreading, one that painted Ethan as a heroic figure, bravely shielding Carter from danger. Before long, the story became a hot topic among the seniors, a much-needed distraction from their stressful studies. "Ethan is incredible. He's just like the male lead in a novel, pushing the girl away and facing the danger alone. It's a shame he can't compete in the physics competition anymore." "Yeah, but saving someone is really admirable." As they spoke, their gazes drifted toward Nina with curiosity. Everyone knew that Ethan and Nina had grown up together. They assumed she must be devastated. But right now, Nina only wanted to focus on her studies. She couldn't care less about their ridiculous drama. Nothing would stop her from getting into a good university. In her past life, Nina had always excelled in her studies, but right before the college entrance exams, Ethan had asked her out, saying he wanted to help her relax. On the way, they ran into a gang of thugs. Nina was beaten and injured, her arm left bruised and swollen. Ethan, however, walked away unharmed. Despite the pain, she forced herself to take the exam, but in the end, her scores were much lower than usual, and she couldn't get into her dream school, one of the country's top universities. Back then, she had been heartbroken, determined to retake the exams, and Ethan, ever the comforting presence, had persuaded her to attend the same second-tier university as him instead. At the time, Nina had thought Ethan was warm and considerate, that with him around, nothing else mattered. But looking back now, too many things about that night didn't add up. Perhaps even back then, Ethan had already started plotting against her. This time, Nina wouldn't let him succeed. So she asked her father for a bodyguard, someone to follow her from a reasonable distance. Even though in this life she had done nothing to wrong Ethan, he was still an unpredictable lunatic. Who knew what he might try? Having a bodyguard around gave Nina peace of mind. What Nina hadn't expected was that the first person her bodyguard had to deal with was Carter. After school, Carter cornered Nina near an alleyway. Before Nina could react, Carter grabbed her wrist and dragged her into a secluded spot. Several gang members were already waiting inside. Carter was dressed in a pure white dress, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders, a picture-perfect school goddess. But right now she was leaning intimately against the leader of the gang, her expression sly. "Logan, this is Ethan's little childhood sweetheart. I guarantee she's still a virgin. Ruin her for me, and then I'll finally be able to stay by Ethan's side without interference. When I have money in the future, I won't forget you guys." Nina stared at them with indifference, as if looking at a pile of trash. In her past life, she had already known that Carter had inappropriate relationships with multiple men. She took pleasure in having different men around her, and Ethan was just one of them. Nina had tried to tell him the truth, but all she got in return was his resentment. "Carter is already dead. Can you stop tarnishing her name?" From that moment on, Nina never mentioned Carter in front of him again. To Ethan, she was simply a girl with a naturally good personality who attracted admiration. He never once realized her true nature. Carter smirked and reassured Logan, the gang leader. "Don't worry, her family isn't as powerful as Ethan's. Even if something happens, I just need to act sweet with him, and he'll take care of it." Nina laughed. Carter was a fool. Ethan's family may have been wealthy, but they were flashy and came from new money. Ethan himself flaunted designer brands wherever he went. In contrast, Nina's parents were discreet and humble in the way they conducted business, and she had inherited that from them. Nina never showed off, yet because of this Carter had assumed she was weak and easy to bully. If they were to compare, Ethan's family was nowhere near as powerful as hers. Otherwise, in her past life, he wouldn't have had to wait over 10 years before finally having the chance to take down Nina's family. Under Carter's encouragement, Logan stepped forward, his eyes filled with lecherous intent. Just as he was about to reach for Nina, a sudden wail of agony filled the alleyway. His arm had been twisted backward by Nina's bodyguard, and within seconds, he was pinned to the ground. Logan tried to scream, but one glance at the cold, merciless expression of the bodyguard sent terror through him. He immediately started begging for mercy. "It wasn't me. Carter made me do it. It was all her idea." Carter, completely shaken, collapsed to the ground, her legs giving out beneath her. Nina looked down at her and spoke calmly. "You treat Ethan like a treasure, but to me, he's nothing more than garbage. Don't ever try to associate me with him again. He's not worth it." Carter wanted to argue, but faced with the bodyguard's presence, she swallowed her words and remained silent. From that day forward, she never approached Nina again. Instead, she focused all her energy on Ethan. Every day after school, she rushed straight to the hospital, staying by his side until late at night, tending to him with utmost devotion. Of course, while doing so, she also made sure to appear fragile and helpless, using the opportunity to ask Ethan for money. Carter was well known in school for coming from a poor family. In the past, she had even earned the nickname Cafeteria Belle for helping serve food in the school canteen. So when she started asking Ethan for money, he didn't even hesitate. He gave her as much as she wanted and told her to ask for more if it wasn't enough. From that point on, Carter's spending habits became increasingly extravagant. Soon she had a group of followers trailing behind her. Those who had once mocked her for being poor now dared not say a word. They could only grumble in hushed voices. So what if she's got Ethan now? Does she really think she's special? Yeah, she's just using her body to get what she wants. That statement, however, wasn't entirely true. While Carter had indeed been involved with other men, she and Ethan had always remained physically pure. Their relationship had never crossed any lines. As for the money, Ethan gave it to her willingly. However, a high school student living in a hospital and spending money like water was bound to attract attention. When Mrs. Miller found out, she was furious. Her son had ended up in the hospital because of Carter, and now she had the audacity to take his money behind her back. Storming into the hospital room, she slapped Carter across the face without hesitation. Grabbing her by the hair, she rained down a series of blows. Carter, ever the delicate damsel in distress, didn't fight back. No matter how much Mrs. Miller hit her, she simply endured it with tear-filled eyes, playing the victim perfectly. Ethan, seeing the woman he adored being mistreated, struggled to get out of bed and shielded Carter with his own body. He even threw harsh words at his own mother, defending Carter. That night, Ethan and Carter ran away from the hospital together. The Miller household descended into chaos, sending out waves of people to search for them. When Nina got home, her parents were still talking about the situation. "Ethan always seemed like a good kid," her dad said, shaking his head. "Who would have thought he'd cause such a mess over a girl? He's really rebellious." "Maybe the two of them are truly in love after all," Nina interjected casually. In her past life, Ethan had spent over a decade patiently waiting for the right moment to take revenge for Carter. That wasn't true love, what was? Nina's mom gave her a sharp look, as if worried that she was speaking this way because she had fallen for someone herself. Fearing that Nina would end up acting as irrational as Ethan, she immediately started lecturing her about the dangers of dating as a student. It was only after Nina repeatedly assured her that she wasn't interested in anyone that she finally dropped the topic. As time passed, the date of the physics competition arrived as scheduled. By the time Nina returned from the competition, Ethan was back at school as well. Though he hadn't fully recovered, he showed up every day with Carter faithfully pushing his wheelchair. A handsome guy, a beautiful girl, and a touching love story. It was only natural that people envied them. But what was even more ridiculous was how they never tried to be discreet. No matter where you went on campus, you could see them acting intimately, as if the entire school belonged to just the two of them. During gym class, while others were playing sports, Ethan and Carter hid under a tree, making out shamelessly. The wet, obscene sounds were impossible to ignore. Those who had stayed in the corner to study heard it all, and some of Nina's classmates turned red from embarrassment. Finally, one of the bolder students shouted in their direction, "This isn't your personal romance novel. Could you stop acting like you're in heat all the time? You two might not care about your reputation, but the rest of us do." The sounds behind the tree stopped abruptly. Moments later, Carter pushed Ethan's wheelchair out from behind the tree, her face flushed. "How could you eavesdrop on us?" she said, her voice soft and aggrieved. "We were already trying to be discreet." The way she spoke made her seem pitiful, like she was the victim here. But unlike Ethan, the rest of Nina's classmates weren't idiots. Hearing her twisted reasoning, they were so furious they immediately started arguing with her, hands on their hips, scolding her without mercy. No matter how manipulative Carter could be, she was no match for an entire group of angry students. Ethan, who always considered himself above petty arguments, wouldn't lower himself to bicker with them either. Instead, he glanced at Nina through the crowd. Over the years, they had developed an unspoken understanding. Without him saying a word, Nina knew he wanted her to help Carter out of this situation. What a joke. Nina wasn't about to wade into this mess. She ignored him completely, pretending she hadn't seen anything, and walked away without a word. In the end, Carter couldn't win the argument and had no choice but to push Ethan's wheelchair and leave defeated. But before long, the sharp voice of the disciplinary director rang out from a nearby corner. "What do you two think you're doing? Call your parents immediately." It turned out that after leaving, Ethan had tried to comfort Carter with another round of kissing, only to be caught red-handed by the director. As the director marched them toward the office, he happened to pass by Nina's group. Seeing them diligently studying even during gym class, he couldn't help but comment, "Look at these students. Even during PE, they're still focused on their studies. And then there's you two hiding in corners wasting time on nonsense. Being a student means putting your education first." After he left, the classmates he had just praised burst into laughter. Who says youth has to be about romance? Even the director thinks we should focus on studying. Carter always calls us bookworms just because we actually do our work, but let's be honest, her grades aren't even good enough to keep up with our worst student. Nina couldn't help but chuckle too. Focusing on their studies was the right choice. Ethan and Carter were called to the office, where their parents had to be notified. Coincidentally, Nina was already in the office at the time, discussing the details of her next physics competition with the teacher. That's how she ended up witnessing the scene firsthand. Ethan stood protectively in front of Carter, gripping her wrist tightly with his uninjured hand, like some kind of knight shielding his princess. His expression was unwavering as he declared to everyone present, "I love Carter. No one can separate us." Nina frowned deeply. At that moment, he reminded her of the man he would become 10 years later. In her past life, after taking over his family's business, Ethan had managed to climb his way up the corporate ladder through sheer competence and determination. No one dared to mock the Millers for being nouveau riche anymore. At the time, many people in the business world had tried to curry favor with him, even sending women his way, but he had coldly rejected every single one of them. Ethan didn't even bother keeping up the act anymore. He had completely torn off the facade. At that moment, he looked exactly like he had in Nina's past life when he defied the mayor. Back then, Nina had thought he was passionate, someone she could rely on, but looking back now, maybe he had done all of that for Carter. Even though she had been dead for years, he had remained faithful to her memory. So all these years, in different ways, he had been mourning her. A sudden chill ran down Nina's spine. She had truly been blind all these years. She had been kept in the dark. At that moment, Carter stepped forward and spoke. "Mrs. Miller, do you really think you're blameless in all this? You've always had a strong need to control Ethan. But he's a person, not a puppet for you to manipulate. Now he's just in a relationship, and you're already trying to suffocate him. Don't you think you're being too controlling?" Mrs. Miller turned to look at Ethan. He averted his gaze, silently agreeing with Carter's words. Disappointment flashed across Mrs. Miller's face, and her body wavered slightly. Nina stepped forward to support her. Mrs. Miller clutched Nina's hand and burst into tears. "Nina, why aren't you the one with Ethan? Why does it have to be her?" "Because our families had always been close. The adults often joked about pairing Ethan and Nina together. At some point, Nina had started to take those jokes seriously. That's why when Carter appeared, she had always found ways to interfere between them, stubbornly believing that Ethan and she were meant to be. But now Nina knew she had been wrong. "Auntie, I only see Ethan as an older brother. We could never be together, so please don't bring this up again." Ethan's expression shifted in shock, clearly unable to understand why Nina was saying this. In his mind, she was the girl who always followed him around, always listened to him. The idea that she would now draw a clear boundary between them was something he had never expected. Carter, on the other hand, laughed. "Ethan, did you hear that? She's been distancing herself from you ever since you got injured. She looks down on you now. I'm the only one left who truly cares about you." She watched as Ethan's expression darkened, then turned to Nina, her face filled with triumph. "You better remember what you just said. Don't come crawling back to him later." Was there something wrong with her brain? How many times did Nina have to say that she had nothing to do with Ethan? Did she not understand simple words? Just then, the office door swung open and Nina's father walked in, his face serious. "Who does Ethan think he is that my daughter would waste her time on him?" The room fell into complete silence. Nina had forgotten her competition materials at home, and since her father had some free time, he had brought them to her. He hadn't expected to walk in on this mess. There was an undeniable authority in the way he carried himself. Ethan instinctively took a step back, but Carter remained oblivious and pointed at Nina. "Everyone in school knows your daughter has been chasing after Ethan. He belongs to me. You better keep her away from him." Nina's father turned to her. She met his gaze and shook her head. In the past, she had truly liked Ethan, but now she couldn't wait to push him into the abyss herself. Understanding Nina's thoughts, her father's expression turned cold. "Keep your little girlfriend in check. I don't want to hear her saying things like this to Nina again." Ethan obediently agreed, but Carter, completely lacking self-awareness, tried to argue. Before she could say another word, Ethan cut her off sharply. Even if he wanted to keep defending Carter, he wouldn't dare act out in front of Nina's father. Carter, however, mistook his reaction as him defending Nina and threw a tantrum. The two of them had a huge fight over it. When Nina got home that evening, her father was waiting for her in the living room. "The Miller family is struggling with cash flow issues. I have money. What do you think I should do?" Nina was stunned. In her past life, the Millers had also encountered financial trouble at this point, but back then, her father had helped them without hesitation simply because of the bond between their families. This time, however, he was asking for Nina's opinion. Perhaps everything that had happened recently had made him more cautious. Nina smiled at her father. Grandpa's biggest wish was to see us expand the family business. Now's the perfect time, isn't it? Her father chuckled, patting her head. You've grown up. Nina was busy with her studies and didn't pay much attention to what her father was doing until Ethan came looking for her. Just because I won't be with you, you had to make your family do this to us? He accused. According to him, Nina's father's intervention had given business leaders, who once hesitated due to the ties between their families, the confidence to strike. Now the Miller family was crumbling under pressure. If you convince your father to help us, I'll consider being with you. Nina was speechless. No wonder Ethan had fallen for Carter. Neither of them seemed to understand basic human decency. Nina had told him countless times that she didn't like him, but he acted as if he were deaf. He still deluded himself into believing she was deeply in love with him. Nina looked at him coldly. Ethan, don't overestimate yourself. Not everyone likes you. I used to see you as an older brother. Now you're not even that. From now on, don't look for me. Treat me like a stranger. But Ethan acted like he hadn't heard Nina. Nina, after everything I've done, don't you think you're overreacting? All you want is to be with me, right? If you get your father to back off, we can be together. Otherwise, you'll never have me. Nina found it hilarious. She told him to get lost as far as possible. Just looking at him made her nauseous. Ethan's face darkened, his arrogance still intact. Before leaving, he sneered, "You'll regret this." Even sitting in his wheelchair, his back was stiff with defiance. After that day, Nina never spoke to Ethan again. They barely even crossed paths. Carter, however, seemed determined to flaunt herself in front of Nina. She would intentionally show off her designer handbags, making sure Nina noticed. Ethan bought me this as an apology gift. He said only something this expensive was worthy of me, she bragged. Nina, I doubt your family could afford something like this. It cost tens of thousands. Her tone was full of smugness. Nina smiled. The Millers were struggling financially, yet Ethan still had money to buy Carter expensive gifts. His love was truly deep. Since he was so devoted, Nina decided to give things a little push. During a casual conversation, she accidentally mentioned this to Mrs. Miller. When Mrs. Miller found out Ethan had been buying Carter luxury goods, she stormed into the classroom, grabbed Carter by the hair, and dragged her out. You whore! All you do is seduce my son and take his money. You have no shame. Before the Miller family gained wealth, Mrs. Miller had done all sorts of hard labor. She was strong. Within moments she had Carter pinned down, slapping her repeatedly. Carter's fair-skinned face quickly swelled with red marks. Ethan, still in his wheelchair, tried to intervene, but ended up falling to the ground. He could only watch helplessly as Carter was beaten. The commotion only stopped when Carter passed out. Later, Nina heard she had fainted because she was pregnant and had gotten too worked up. When Nina heard the news, her jaw nearly dropped. Pregnant? Impossible. Ethan was infertile. In Nina's past life after they got married, a medical exam confirmed that he was sterile and could never have children. There was no mistake. There was only one possibility. The child wasn't his. Nina had assumed that once Carter got together with Ethan, she would cut ties with her other lovers. She never expected her to be bold enough to get pregnant. After discovering her pregnancy, Carter insisted the baby was Ethan's. She successfully moved into the Miller household. Rumors spread that the Millers valued the baby immensely, giving Carter the best food and care, treating her like a treasure. Ethan even stopped going to school, staying home to take care of her. Our classmates were in awe. If I had a love like that, I wouldn't mind having a baby either. I heard they even plan to retake the college entrance exams together after the baby is born. Others scoffed. Skipping school to have a baby? How stupid can you be? Nina completely agreed. Getting caught up in romance was the worst mistake a student could make. Senior year was getting more intense, and study sessions stretched later into the night. One evening, as Nina returned home late, she happened to overhear an argument between Ethan and his mother in the courtyard. If it weren't for the fact that the men in this family have fertility issues, do you think I would have allowed her to stay? Mrs. Miller sneered. Once the baby is born, I'll send it away. She has no place in this family. Mom, you can't do that. Ethan shouted. Besides, just because Dad had trouble conceiving doesn't mean I have the same problem. Carter and I will have more children in the future. She's going to be the mother of my kids. You can't kick her out. So, Ethan still didn't know he was infertile. He was actually looking forward to the baby's arrival with excitement. Nina smirked. If he was so full of hope, wouldn't it be more devastating for him to learn the truth after the baby was born? Let him be happy for a little while longer. Nina focused on her studies, only occasionally hearing updates about their family through gossip. Apparently, Carter had completely dropped her innocent act. Now that she was carrying Ethan's child, she ruled over the Miller household. If she couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, she would make sure the whole family stayed awake with her. If she craved something, Ethan had to fetch it immediately, or she'd threaten him using the baby. The Miller family had been tormented endlessly. The next time Nina saw Ethan, he looked exhausted, his whole demeanor drained. Nina ignored him and kept studying. Before long, the physics competition came to an end. Nina won first place, which meant her college entrance exam score would get a significant boost. With this advantage, she was sure to get into her dream university. That night, after Nina received the award, Ethan came to find her. She instinctively stepped back, keeping her distance. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. Do we really have to be like this? Nina found it strange. Their relationship had already deteriorated beyond repair, yet he was still saying things like this. As she turned to leave, he stopped her. Nina, I had a dream. A dream in it I won first place in the competition. Did he regain memories from his past life? Nina stared at him intently before replying. Sounds like just a dream. You can't even hold a pen now. How are you going to take an exam? Ethan fell silent. Nina walked away without looking back. From that day on, Ethan started sending Nina text messages every day. He wrote about how he dreamed they went to the same university, how they dated, how he even proposed to her. Nina got so fed up that she blocked his number. She focused on studying. No way was she going to let that dog of a man disturb her. Whenever they crossed paths, Ethan looked like he wanted to say something, his eyes filled with complicated emotions. Nina had her bodyguard stand in front of her, blocking his gaze completely. Eventually, Ethan started avoiding her altogether. Nina figured that in his dreams, he had probably seen everything he had done to her in their past life. Good. Without him pestering her, she could focus on studying. The days passed, and like every other senior, Nina buried herself in preparation for the college entrance exams, studying from early morning until late at night. The night before the exams, Nina's mother, feeling sorry for how hard she had been working, insisted she go out for some fresh air with friends. Under her repeated persuasion, Nina stepped outside, but halfway down the road, she ran into the same thug who had injured her arm in her past life right before her college exams. Fortunately, her bodyguard had been keeping watch and acted swiftly, pinning the man down and dragging him to the police station. As Nina looked at the man, she felt a moment of disorientation. This time I had no ties with Ethan, so why did this still happen? Her bodyguard escorted Nina home safely. When her parents found out, they were so anxious they didn't sleep all night. The next morning, they personally took her to the exam hall, bringing extra bodyguards along to ensure nothing happened. Once the exams were over, Nina hired a private investigator. Ever since her rebirth, she had someone secretly investigating Carter. Nina had gathered plenty of evidence, photos of her with various men. Initially, she had only planned to keep them as leverage, but since Ethan had chosen to treat her this way, Nina no longer had to be merciful. On the day Carter gave birth, Nina had the photos delivered to the Miller household. That very night, a violent argument erupted at their home. Mrs. Miller furiously cursed Carter, calling her shameless. Mr. Miller smashed things in a fit of rage. Ethan remained silent throughout, his eyes filled with cold darkness. Carter was thrown out. The Millers abandoned her at the hospital, refusing to cover any medical bills. Within days, Carter was outside the Miller estate, clutching the baby and wailing. I gave birth to a child for your family, and now you're throwing me away. Do you have no conscience? After childbirth, Carter's figure was no longer as delicate as before, and her once fair complexion had started to show signs of wear. Her hysterical behavior made her look like nothing more than a desperate, washed-up woman. Carter was nothing like the delicate girl she used to be. The Millers never showed up. They let her stand outside under the scorching sun, completely ignoring her cries. As time passed, more and more onlookers gathered in front of the Miller estate, whispering amongst themselves. Only then did Ethan finally come outside. But there was no love in his eyes when he looked at Carter. His voice was cold as he said, "I'm not raising another man's child. Give up already." Carter burst into tears, trying to throw herself into his arms. "Ethan, you can't say that. This is your child. You can't just abandon us." Ethan, confident after the DNA test results, scoffed. "Then tell me, how did two people with monolids suddenly give birth to a baby with double eyelids? A genetic mutation." Carter had never been good at academics. She had no idea what he meant. All she knew was that she couldn't lose her grip on him. She'd been living comfortably in the Miller household, pampered and cared for. There was no way she wanted to go back to her impoverished life. Ethan was her last lifeline, and she wasn't about to let go. "Are you regretting being with me? It's because of Nina, isn't it? You think I'm not as beautiful as her after having a child, and now you want her back, don't you?" Watching them from the crowd, Nina felt like she had just swallowed a fly. Both of them were completely delusional. She quietly stepped back, wanting nothing to do with their mess. Just then someone in the crowd spoke up. "Miss, did you not pay attention in school? Two people with monolids can't have a baby with double eyelids. You should go find the real father instead." The crowd erupted into laughter. Carter's face turned red and then pale. No wonder the Millers had abandoned her in the hospital. They had already figured out the truth. Holding the baby tightly, she hurried away, too ashamed to even lift her head. Nina thought this would be the end of it, but then Ethan came looking for her again. "Nina, I was wrong," he said. "I never expected Carter to be that kind of person. I can't believe I treated you like that because of her. Can you forgive me?" Nina frowned. Ethan continued, "If only you had stopped me back then." This life had taken a completely different path from the previous one. Because Nina hadn't stopped him, Ethan had gone from a golden boy with a bright future to a high school dropout. The child he had cared for so much turned out not to be his. Everything about him was different now. He had lost all of his previous arrogance. "Can we go back to how things were?" he asked. Nina didn't answer. Instead, she asked him, "Was it you who sent someone to break my arm before the college entrance exams?" Ethan's eyes flickered and he stammered, unable to give Nina a clear answer. She had him thrown out immediately. That summer, Nina joined her father's company. Using the knowledge from her past life, she stole key business deals from the Millers, accelerating their downfall. On the day the Millers declared bankruptcy, the police showed up with handcuffs, arresting Ethan for intentional assault. The thug who had tried to attack Nina before her exams had confessed everything in prison. Ethan's parents had already been crushed by their company's collapse, but his arrest was the final blow. Mrs. Miller completely lost her mind. One day a car plowed into a young mother and child, running them over repeatedly. From the security footage, it was clear it was Mrs. Miller and Carter. Nina put down her phone and stopped paying attention to anything related to their family. They had nothing to do with her anymore. When summer ended, Nina entered her dream university. She got along well with her roommates, participating in all sorts of activities. During her free time, she worked at her father's company, where he praised her business instincts. He even started letting her handle the company's core operations. Nina couldn't help but think back to her past life. Because of one sentence from Ethan, a woman should have a stable job. She had chosen to become a university professor instead of joining the business world. Meanwhile, he had followed her father around, pretending to be capable and reliable, earning her father's trust. After Nina's death, her father, devastated, handed everything over to Ethan. That was why her family had collapsed so quickly. But this time, Nina used her knowledge of the future to enter emerging industries and made a fortune. Because of Nina's success, many people watched her every move, following her investments, hoping to profit off her decisions. With her achievements came a growing number of admirers. One evening, while having dinner with one of her suitors, Nina spotted Ethan. He was working as a busboy, carrying plates at the restaurant. After serving time in prison, he couldn't find a decent job. When their eyes met, he froze. His grip slipped, and the plates shattered on the floor. The restaurant owner stormed over and scolded him. Ethan stood there numbly, silently taking the verbal abuse. "Do you know him?" Nina's date asked. Nina shook her head. "No. Let's go inside and eat." That was the last time Nina ever saw Ethan. Her vibrant, fulfilling life was only just beginning. The end. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to subscribe for more stories.